I'm going to start by removing the wheel, 21mm socket, take all 5 of your lug nuts off, and then remove the wheel. Now that the wheel's off, let's remove this bolt that holds the brake hose in place, 12mm socket. There we go. Continuing on over here, I'm going to take this 10mm bolt out for the ABS sensor. Okay, remove that off of the strut, and actually if you follow it up, you'll see another 10mm bolt that's holding it right onto here. This will give you a lot more slack in the wire once the knuckle wants to fall down. Now I'm going to take the brake caliper off, and I'm going to take the whole caliper off with the bracket, or directly from the bracket, not separate. 14mm bolts at the top and at the bottom. Remove both of those. Okay, here's the top bolt. Take this out. Take off the bottom one as well. Usually I like to leave the first bolt in a couple threads, but this one's kind of hard to reach, so I'm just going to hold the caliper. Otherwise it's going to want to fling forward if I undo this one. Okay, take the bolt out, take the caliper right off, set it aside. I'm going to hang it with a bungee cord so that it puts no pressure on this brake hose. Now I'm going to take off this rear sway bar link, and well, it's in pretty poor condition, but I'm going to try and save it as much as I can. And this is not the greatest thing to do, but I'm going to put some locking pliers on the back here. Usually this rips the boot, so that's why I'm trying to use the smallest ones I have and lock them on as tight as I can. And this is hopefully going to hold the stud for me to prevent it from spinning. There we go, that's nice and tight. With a 14mm socket, let's try and remove this nut. So this being pretty rusted, I'm actually going to try and heat it up a little bit on the nut side, and hopefully that will help break it free. Don't heat it up too much, and be careful where you point the heat. This is a gas pressurized shock, so watch out. 14mm socket, let's give this a shot. Okay, the nut is off. That's great. Let's try to take this sway bar link off. There it is. The boot is not torn, so that's perfect. I'm actually going to leave my locking pliers on here for when I reinstall. Now I'm going to try to remove these two nuts here. 19mm, I'm going to hold the bolt side with a 19mm wrench. So 19 on both sides. I'm going to start with the top. Okay, remove this top nut first. Okay, the bolt moves freely, that's perfect. Usually if they don't move, that means they're seized up in the knuckle. Now let's do the bottom nut. Same size. Ooh, spark at the end there. Okay, this one moves too, that's perfect. Grab a little hammer. This one actually slides right out, so I don't have to hammer it, but this one I'm going to drive out. Okay, there we go. Usually, if rust isn't an issue, the knuckle at this point would want to fall down, but mine's kind of seized in here, so I'm going to grab a couple pry bars and try to separate these two. Now I'm going to grab a hammer, try to separate these two. It's pretty rusted in here, so they're kind of fused together. Be careful when you do this because you're hitting on a pressurized shock. So now that they're a little separated, I can grab a pry bar, stick it in here, pull this down, and there we go. The strut is free from the knuckle. Try to get this out of the way here. Oops, rotor's coming off, so I'm going to take that before it smashes my feet. Okay, just going to continue. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted this to be completely out of the knuckle. Now let's move up top and unbolt it from the top. Now, to access the top of the strut, we're going to have to remove the back seat. I'm going to start down here and just pull this bottom cushion up. It's held on by two clips, one on each side. I'm going to have to go over there for that one. There we go. Now you can slide this right out, pull it forward and out of the way. Now let's take off the back of the back seat. There's 4 12mm bolts. I'm going to start over here, work my way to the other side. There's one. If you follow it along, it's this one right here that you want to remove. Another one right over here. And then one all the way on the other side. Okay, set all those aside. Now lift the whole seat up. It's got hooks on the back side that hold it in. There we go. Once you lift it up high enough, it'll pull forward. You don't have to undo the seat belts. You can just slide the whole thing out. The seat belts will come out. Lay it forward. To get this whole insulation and vapor barrier off, you have to pull the trunk deck off or the rear deck off, and then the side panel, it's basically tucked underneath everywhere. So what I'm going to do is take a razor blade, just cut right into the rubber here. Just going to cut this insulation, and right there you can see the mounting bolts, or the nuts I should say, for the strut, and we can get to them through here. Make sure you don't cut any wires when you're doing this. There we go. Make your own little access port. It's a lot easier than taking off half the panels back here. And they should all be some 14mm nuts. So let's grab a tool and take those off. The 12mm nuts you can remove easily with a ratcheting wrench. A socket wrench will have kind of a hard time fitting back there just because of the height that is needed. So once you break it free, these should come off by hand. I'm going to leave this front one for last because when this one comes off, the strut's going to want to fall down, and I want to be able to catch it so it doesn't actually fall down. So I'm going to take these two off, break them free. Second one's off. For this one, I'm going to use my ratchet just so I can get some better leverage. And I'm going to break this free, and once it's starting to come off, you'll notice that the strut is actually going to want to fall down, and I'm going to go down and catch it. Okay, I'm going to stop right here, leave these last few threads for when I'm down and ready to catch it. Pull up on the strut, remove this last nut, set that aside safely. Now it's free, and we just have to find a way to take this out. Watch out for your ABS wire. You don't want to rip it out. Slide it down. Make sure this goes over like that. Okay. Continue bringing it over. There we go. Here's your rear strut. Okay, take your new strut, and you kind of have to go the same way that you took it out, just because it has to be on this side of the knuckle, and you won't be able to get it past that sway bar if you don't go this way. So watch out for your ABS wire, slide this up. Once you get up here, you want to line up the studs with the 3 bolt holes, and as soon as they line up, I have all my 3 of my nuts ready up there, so now that it's in, I'm actually gonna go up here, start on one of them. Okay, here's the first one. Bottom it out by hand as much as you can. Let's get the other 2 on. And I'm gonna snug these up, but I won't tighten them, or I won't torque them, I should say, until the weight of the suspension is on the ground and the strut is loaded with the weight of the car, because that's actually going to allow the strut to seat fully into position, and that way I can torque it correctly. Now that these are bottomed out, I'll just give them a quick snug with the ratchet. That way I know they're tight. And then, like I said, when the wheel is on and the car's on the ground, I'll come back here, and this will be the last thing I do, is torque these 3 nuts. Now, this side one I can't really get to with my ratchet, so I'm just going to use my wrench and tighten it up. There we go. Now let's go back underneath and reconnect everything. Now bring the knuckle down and into the strut. There we go. Okay, that's lined up. Now we just have to push the knuckle up into position. Now with the knuckle into position almost, I'm going to push back on the strut and bring the knuckle up at the same time. Once the knuckle goes up here, then it'll slide in. So that's what I'm aiming for. There we go, just like that. Bring it up a little more. Oh, okay, there. Oops, too much. You'll notice I put a little bit of anti-seize on this here so that the seizing doesn't happen again in the future. Okay, push the knuckle in, just like that. Get your 2 bolts, slide them in from the front to the back. Looks like this hole lines up, almost. You can gently tap the bolt through. Okay, let's put the top one in. Now for the top one, you're gonna have to push in on the knuckle. I'm gonna put the rotor back. Okay, the rotor is gonna give me a nice flat surface to push on. Slide this top bolt through. There we go, make sure it comes through all the way. Same with the bottom, wipe off the anti-seize. If you applied any, you don't really want anti-seize on the threads of these bolts here. I mainly applied it to the inside of the knuckle, that way it doesn't get stuck in the future. And now we'll grab the 2 nuts and slide those on. One and 2. Let's bottom these out. Okay, before this gets snugged up all the way, make sure the knuckle's pressed in completely. Do the same to the bottom. Let's torque these to 140 foot-pounds. Okay, that's 1. And the second one. Let's put the sway bar link back in. Still have my locking pliers on here. Slide this on, start the nut on. Make sure it threads on by hand. Snug it up. Remove the pliers. Grab your caliper. Make sure the pads are still seated in. Put it up and over the rotor, and let's start the 2 bolts in. Okay, and there's 1 on the bottom. And start this one in on the top here. This one's going to be a little bit more challenging just because there isn't much room to work with. All right, let's snug them up and then torque them to 34 foot-pounds. One and 2. And there's 1. For this top one, I'm going to need a small extension. There we go. That's both of these torqued. Let's reattach the ABS wire onto the body here. A 10mm bolt. Don't make that too tight because it'll break. And then if you follow it down, there was a 10mm bolt right down here. Make sure this hook goes into its corresponding hole. That way it's locked in properly. There we go. And let's put the brake hose back, reattach that with this bigger 12mm bolt. I like to put anti-seize on the threads of these because otherwise over time they kind of get stuck in there. Perfect. Let's get the wheel on. Put on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 76 foot-pounds. 76 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now with the weight of the vehicle on the suspension, we'll come back here, torque these to 26 foot-pounds. For some reason you can't torque this one because your torque wrench doesn't fit, just do your best. But with a 3/8 torque wrench, you are are most likely going to be able to get it in here. You just have to find the right angle. On the back of this seat, you'll notice these hooks. There's 3 of them, 1 on each side and then 1 in the middle. These actually line up with these holes here, obviously 3, and this is what secures it at the top, so you need to make sure that these hooks actually engage, otherwise the top of the seat can fold down even if it's bolted on the bottom. So as I put it in, you'll see me lifting it up and down, and then I'll give it a tug to make sure that it's actually engaged. So push this back into position. Once it's pushed back all the way, lift it up. Try to hook in those hooks. There we go, that went back. Push it down, and you can see this side hooked in, the middle hooked in, but this side did not. The seat is all floppy, so let's lift up this side only, and hopefully we can get it in. I'm pushing back at the same time as I lift, and I just felt it drop into its hole there. So that's secure. All 3 sides are secure. Now it's bolted in on the bottom. So I was ready to put the bolts in, then I noticed that right there doesn't line up. So you need to pay attention to that. Make sure it actually does line up. That way you can make sure it's seated all the way and put your bolts in. Now let's get these bolts in. Make sure everything lines up. Start it on, and I'm not going to tighten them yet. I just want to start all of them in first. Okay, do the other side. And last one. Okay, now snug these up. Get the bottom part of the seat in, slide it down and in at the same time. You have to make sure it gets pressed in all the way, otherwise the clips at the front won't line up. This one fell right in, so I'm going to press it down and lock it. You'll hear a click. If you can't press it down or it's at a weird angle, if you just sit on the seat, usually that does the trick. Let's do this side as well. Push it in, down. There we go, that's locked in. Check that your seat belts are still functioning properly after you've pull them out. Everything's lined up perfect.